Good day, everybody. I'd like to start my talk today by simply throwing out three statements. Statements that you've all heard a million times before in various guises, and I'm sure has formed part of your own narrative. Here's the first one. If you put your mind to it, anything is possible. If you can think it, you can achieve it. A strong mind makes the impossible possible. No one ever gives me pushback when I say that. In fact, over hundreds of keynotes I've delivered around the world to every level of audience, no one has ever queried it when I say the human mind is the gateway to absolute greatness, because it really is. But where I do get a little bit of pushback and raised eyebrows is when I make the following statement. The human mind, this gateway to absolute greatness, is actually our biggest limitation. And that is what I want to explore with you today. Because as powerful as our minds are at helping us achieve our best, they are equally powerful in making us believe we have achieved our best. So let's go on a brief journey. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, you know what? I achieve at my best. I'm getting by. I take my family away on a holiday. I have a big house. I hit my target. I achieve my goals. And of course you do, because you believe and trust in your own mind to navigate you there. But I hope to show today through my talk, perhaps in a non-scientific way, how I've come to a certain awareness, which I want to share with you. An awareness of how our minds are actually defaulted to holding us back, not to propelling us forward. In fact, the very strength of our minds and the power of our minds is exactly the reason so many of us will underachieve our entire lives. And who are we to argue with what we have been convinced is so by our minds? Strange thing to say, perhaps, but it gets stranger. We are the we in that sentence. And when we have been convinced, essentially by ourselves, we have no reason to query it. We have no reason to believe we might not be achieving at our best. And I want to share with you how I came to that understanding. I want to introduce you to the element of cold and its unbelievable power. Now, I'm what you call an ultra-extreme open water and ice swimming adventurer. And it's through a fascinating story that took me initially from my couch, where I was becoming a very talented couch potato. The ripe age of 30, I decided to change my lifestyle and simply start a little swimming squad, probably just to tweak the lifestyle a bit and to justify the next beer. And it was this first step of joining a swimming squad that started a fascinating journey for me. Not just a physical journey to some of the planet's most inhospitable and remote places, but a mental journey from repeat exposures to eventually deadly cold water, and managing to extend my time in these circumstances and hostile environments for much longer than most believed was humanly possible. And slowly through this, starting to formulate an understanding of how our minds really work. Now, in my game of extreme cold swimming, the accepted attire is simply a costume, goggles, and a cap. There's no wetsuit, there's no grease, there's no flotation aids at all. It's a very pure sport. And it didn't take me long to conclude the following. By repeat immersions in the very cold water in and around Cape Town, South Africa, my hood, where the water is around 14 to 15 degrees Celsius, which is around 54 Fahrenheit, concluded the following, that humans have not evolved well at all to handle the cold. However, we have evolved extremely well to avoid it. So when we throw ourselves into increasingly cold conditions, our body, but more importantly our mind, starts to implement a barrage of defense mechanisms to convince us to get out. I started to notice that no matter how routine the swim that I was doing or the challenge I'd undertaken was, how familiar it was to me, how many times I'd done it before, as the cold started to creep into my core, my mind started to react in a very specific way. Even intuitively, I knew without a doubt I can make the challenge I'd undertaken. I found myself in a position where I could not have positive thoughts. I could not have thoughts of I must persevere, I must push harder, reasons why I should continue, why I should complete the goal, except it was always the other way around. Reasons why I should get out, reasons why I can get into that support boat, back to warmth, back to safety. I bet many of you watching this today are wondering, does he ever see sharks in those dangerous waters in South Africa? Well, let me tell you, a cold water swimmer sometimes prays for a shark. Because if the support crew alongside see that fin coming, they will pull me out the water really quickly into the safety boat alongside, where I can wrap a nice warm blanket and have a hot chocolate. And it wouldn't have been me who failed. There was a shark. A safety net was starting to form. And the more I did this, the more I let the cold start to creep into my core, the more I started to experience consciously what all of us experience subconsciously on a daily basis. A very accentuated defensive reaction of my mind to the environment I was in. And slowly it started to dawn on me that all this negative energy that I was experiencing, all these negative thoughts, had nothing at all to do with my ability, had nothing at all to do with my training, nothing to do with my dedication to achieve the goal. It was merely these defense mechanisms that were highly evolved to make sure that I get out of what it perceives as a hostile environment. My swimming journey then took me to take on perhaps the Everest of all cold water marathon swims, the English Channel. 34 kilometers across with many, many hurdles on the way and cold water. It was way before my time, and I had been swimming in the English Channel for 9 hours. The weather had turned absolutely terrible, and it had whipped the water up, and there were waves crashing over me, and it had started to get dark. I was freezing cold, and 9 hours into that swim, I hit the wall. I hope you all understand the concept of hitting the wall. When you hit the wall and you're in any endurance event, it usually signifies the end for you. The tank is empty and you cannot go on. Now, when you hit the wall and you're 9 hours into an English Channel swim, the water is rough, it is getting dark and you're freezing cold. If you even put one hand on the support boat alongside or get any help, your swim is over. Hitting the wall is absolutely devastating. And here I was, it was absolutely impossible for me to take one more stroke. Had I pulled out of the English Channel on that day, I'd have been disappointed, obviously. But I wouldn't beat myself up too much. Why would I? I had trained for 2 years to get to that English Channel. I had prepared and studied weather charts for ages to pick the perfect day. I'd put the crew in place and I'd swum for 9 hours and the weather had turned terrible. I would have climbed out onto the support boat and everybody would have patted me on the back and said, "Well done, Ryan, that was incredible. 9 hours in those conditions," and I would have been like an excuse magnet and sucked it all in and nodded my head and said, "Yes, I did my best." And that is exactly what the default setting of our minds is designed to do. It's designed to make you believe in your own limitations. Because when we believe in those limitations, we have no reason to challenge them. Now, I did not pull out of the English Channel that day, and slowly a picture was starting to formulate. Largely thanks to a very strong support team, I swam for another 4 hours and eventually walked out onto a deserted, icy cold, pitch dark French beach 12 hours and 54 minutes later. And I started to unpack what had gone on for me out there in the English Channel. I had reached a point where it was impossible for me to carry on, yet somehow I had shifted, I had changed gear, I had flicked a switch, or however you want to look at it, and I'd swum for another 4 hours in terrible conditions and achieved my goal. I was starting to get a first-hand look at just what can be achieved if you are able to push past the initial point where your mind tells you it is time to get out. And I was starting to become aware. Now let's skip a few years forward, and I want to take you with me to a place called Tumen, Siberia. And I still ask myself to this very day how I got myself into this mess. But I had committed to take on a challenge to swim a 1 kilometer distance, that's 1,000 meters, in this little place called Tumen at an ice swimming event. And without doing much more homework before I arrived, the buses dropped me off at the swimming venue where the pools were cut from a frozen lake, and I walked smack into the teeth of minus 33 degrees Celsius. That's minus 27 Fahrenheit. And as the bite of that cold hit my skin, my mind immediately took me to that place of impossible. No way on God's green earth am I stripping out of these 5 layers of clothing in minus 33 degrees Celsius into a costume and then jumping into frozen water still covered by ice to try and swim 40 laps of this swimming pool to get my 1 kilometer distance. It is just impossible. Death is the only outcome. Yet 24 hours later, after an intense mental process and lots of self-counseling, I found myself standing barefoot, feet sticking to the dry Siberian ice, diving into the frigid water, breathing minus 33 degrees deep into my lungs. And instantly and very consciously, I felt my mind implement a barrage of defense mechanisms. It implemented pain, panic, fear, hyperventilation. They all came together in a split second to accentuate self-doubt. I was denied the ability of rational thought. All I could think of was how to get out. But now I was aware. And I survived my 1 kilometer in Siberia, and I achieved the goal. And ladies and gentlemen, I am no different to any of you. I'm complete average Joe. Our minds are indeed the most amazing, versatile, unexplored power tools that we have as a human race. But as a human race, for our safety and for our survival, it has to use a percentage of that power to make us believe in our own limitations, to make us believe we are giving our best. And that is in order to keep us safe. Now let's forget about the cold for a while. That's my pain. I want to talk about our daily lives, our everyday lives, where we face a barrage of difficult decisions and hostile environments, be it in business, in sport, in family, in social, in personal, where exactly the same processes are at play, turning us away, making us believe that we have already achieved our best and not having any inkling that we could do better. And the reason for this, it finally dawned on me, is that not only have we evolved to keep safe from physical harm, we have evolved to keep safe from the emotional pain that comes from failure. Because when we fail, there's a little bit of hurt, and there are consequences, and there might be humiliation, and naturally, the powerhouse of our minds does not allow that to happen. And sadly, in our daily realities, that means missed opportunities. Yes, we might fail. There will be consequences. There might even be humiliation, but there are always learnings. And where there are learnings, there's growth. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end my talk just introducing you to 2 lines, very simply. Firstly, the line where your mind tells you the end point is where we naturally do a U-turn back to comfort without even knowing it. Way further down the line is another line which perhaps we should never cross, that I call the real impossible. And it's only when we are aware can we figure out how to step over that first line that the mind sets for you and immerse yourself between the two where the magic happens. It is my hope, ladies and gentlemen, that if you don't yet completely believe me, because maybe your powerhouse mind is not allowing you to, that maybe, just maybe, you're now aware that you are being governed by an overzealously protective mind that is steering you back to comfort rather than propelling you forward to embrace opportunity. Test it out for yourselves. Identify your own safety boat and how readily you jump into it. Perhaps you can gain the edge by staying in the water just a little bit longer.